Did you know that the basic process elements of all creation, the Sefirot, all contain aspects of each other? In this explainer, we will introduce the Kabbalistic concept of Sefirot. Please note that all the ideas we will introduce are fully explained with source material in my latest book, Shomer Emunim, The Introduction to Kabbalah. Click on the link in the description below for details about my book. The Sefirot are a sequence of processes through which a lower world level is created from a higher world level. This overall set of processes generates a perception of separation within the lower world level, such that it sees itself as a separate entity. The Sefirot are therefore all about separation, and it is a curiosity that the word separate in English has the same consonants as the word Sefirot in Hebrew. It is a Kabbalistic axiom that the generic creation process of every lower level from every higher level is performed through 10 Sefirot processes, starting from the first Sefirah, called Keter, that initiates the process, and culminating with the 10th Sefirah, Malchut, within which the lower level, the new entity, comes into existence. The Kabbalists use the Sefirot as a highly refined analogy for this generic creation process. To enable our understanding, even though the Sefirot relate to processes that are highly abstracted from anything that we can relate to, nevertheless, the Kabbalists framed the Sefirot analogy in human terms, using the process flow of how we create something new. So, using this human analogy, every creation process starts with a motivation, a will to achieve a final creative goal. This is the Sefirah of Keter. Then an intellectual process is applied to the will to come up with a plan of how to achieve it. This is comprised of the 3 Sefirot of Chochma, Binah and Da'at. Then resources are allocated to the creation project. These resources are the 3 Sefirot of Chesed, Gevurot and Tiferet. The creation process is then commenced and resource adjustments are made throughout the creation process. These adjustments are the 3 Sefirot of Netzach, Hod and Yesod. Eventually, the project reaches completion and the initial motivation has become the final created entity. This final stage is the Sefirah of Malchut. Now, even though I said there are only 10 Sefirot, I mentioned 11. An explanation of this is beyond the scope of this series, but please do see my book, which explains all the Sefirot and why there are really only 10 Sefirot. In explainer number 3, we introduce the concept of Tzimtzum, which generates a final concealment of the higher levels. The Tzimtzum process only occurs in the Sefirah of Malchut, the very last stage of the overall set of Sefirot processes. Even though the Sefirot are separated from one another, this is only in terms of their external presentation. However, in their inner essence, they are entirely interconnected and they therefore contain all aspects of each other. Nevertheless, their external presentation of separation is expressed by one aspect becoming dominant, and it is this dominant aspect that differentiates and separates one Sefirah from another. In the last explainer, we touched on the concept of Chasadim and Gevurot, of a bestowal of energy and of its constraint. Every Sefirah contains a unique mix of Chasadim and Gevurot, and depending on its relative relationship with other Sefirot, it can exhibit a provision of energy or a constrained restriction. Therefore, in essence, every Sefirah is a part of the whole, and at the same time, the part contains all aspects of the whole. How can this be? A simple contemporary analogy for this is the idea of the DNA. Every human cell in the body contains the genetic coding for every other part of the body, and at the same time, only one part of the body is expressed externally in the specific body part that the cell exists within. So, every part, every human cell contains the coding for the whole, the body. While the DNA is a good analogy, it does not adequately capture how the dominance of a particular aspect expressed in a Sefirah is not fixed. The dominant aspect is relative and subject to change, as the relationship of that Sefirah changes in respect of other Sefirot. A much better analogy to explain this is the Doppler effect. Scientifically, everything that exists in the universe can be understood as being comprised of waves. Even every molecule, every atom, every subatomic particle, everything can be viewed in terms of waves. The Doppler effect explains how waves change based on relative motion between existing entities. A common example is with sound waves emitted by a car's engine. When the car is driving towards you, the pitch of the sound is higher. Then it passes you and is driving away from you, and as it passes, the pitch suddenly lowers. Consider that when it is driving towards you, it is also driving away from your friend who is standing 500 meters away from you. You hear a high-pitched sound. At the same time, your friend hears a low-pitched sound. In addition, the driver in the car hears a sound that is somewhere between the high and low pitches. The question is, who is hearing the real sound? You, your friend, the driver, or perhaps any of the many other people in the proximity that may also be hearing many different sounds from this car? The answer is that all are simultaneously true, and that all sound pitches are contained within the same single sound emitted by the car. The specific sound pitch that becomes dominant depends on the relative position, the relative relationship between the listener and the car. Just as the Doppler effect works with sound, it also works with light, and is noticeable when things are moving at a sizable percentage of the speed of light. Light emitted by an entity traveling away from you appears redder, known as redshift, whereas light emitted by an entity traveling towards you appears bluer, known as blue shift. If there are many observers of the light source, then all the colors they perceive will comprise the entire color spectrum. So all colors are contained in the light, but only one color becomes dominant in the relationship between the specific observer and the light at any one time. Since everything in the universe can be understood as being comprised of waves, all aspects of the universe have an underlying relative relationship. Similarly, every Sefirah contains all aspects of all Sefirot. The particular trait of Chasadim or Gevurot, or of any relative mix between them that becomes dominant in any instance, entirely depends on the relative relationship that a specific Sefirah has with the Sefirot it interacts with. So, to summarize, there are 10 Sefirot processes in the creation of every lower world level from every higher world level, and of every entity that exists within every level. The Sefirot generate separation that ultimately creates the lower level world that perceives itself as being separate from its source. In their internal essence, the Sefirot are interconnected and contain all aspects of each other. It is only their external presentation that gives the appearance of separation, where each Sefirah has one aspect that becomes dominant over all others. This is described by the DNA and Doppler effect analogies. In our next explainer, we will introduce the interaction of the two Sefirot of Chochma and Binah, and use them to explain how we humans relate to the world around us. Before you go, don't forget, click on the link in the description below for details about Shomer Emunim, the introduction to Kabbalah, which contains comprehensive explanations and sources for everything in this explainer series. So, thank you for listening, and looking forward to seeing you in explainer number 6.